Hey everybody again.
Hello.
It's number 4 today. We're finishing the fall, which you'll probably be pleased about. It's a bit depressing, isn't it? Genesis, we always think of the fall being just Genesis chapter 3, but I'm hoping that you'll see that the writer in Genesis really wants us to understand over from chapter 3 really right until chapter 11 just the effect of the rebellion against God for the world. So we're in chapters 10 and 11 today. We've looked at the rebellion that started off as kind of personal rebellion.
Yeah.
One person choosing to go the way of the beast rather than the way of God. And that's now mushroomed into the whole of the world, even the spiritual world, in rebellion to God, wanting to do their own thing, choose their own way, defining right and wrong for themselves. That's the state that we find ourselves in.
Yeah.
And we get to chapter 10. It talks about how the nations of the earth were made up from the 3 children of Noah.
Ham.
Yeah. Shem.
Shem and Japheth.
Yes, that's right. So out of those 3 children, all the nations of the world, there's 70 of them that come. And 70 becomes a kind of a recognised number.
Shorthand.
Representing the whole world, all the nations of the world. So yeah, we'll see that again as we go through the Bible in various places. The number 70. Interestingly enough, just as we go through, it's easy to miss this, but there's one individual that's highlighted when we go through this list of all the different nations. It's in verse 8. It's a chap called Nimrod. Do you want to try and just read a couple of verses about him?
Cush was the father of Nimrod, who became a mighty warrior on the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. That is why it is said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord.
Okay, so there's this chap Nimrod, who's a warrior, a hunter of men, I think is the original, and he was famous for being a mighty hunter, mighty warrior, and it talks about him building the first kingdom in verse 10 and 11. It talks about he was the one that built the kingdom of Babylon, and then verse 11, Assyria. Babylon and Assyria, which the people reading this when it was written would automatically think, I've heard of that before. Babylon and Assyria, the 2 great enemies of the people of God throughout the scriptures. And here we find the guy that's built them, the guy that made them in the first place. And it's actually interesting that it's the first mention of the word kingdom in the Bible. It's like this is the alternative kingdom to the kingdom of God that he's making. And we're going to read about it more fully now in chapter 11, how this Babylon was created and what went in there. And don't forget this chap Nimrod, because it's quite an important little bit of information that we've been given about him there. Okay, so chapter 11, we're introduced to this passage by saying the whole world had one language and a common speech. Now this is interesting just because chapter 10 talks about this table of nations when they all had their own territories and their own languages.
Okay.
So there's lots of debate here about, is chapter 11 kind of explaining chapter 10? In other words, chapter 11 should really go before chapter 10, or why did the writer put chapter 10 before chapter 11?
Do you know the answer?
I know some. I've got
what
some
do you
thoughts.
Think?
I wonder whether actually it's the fact that God told people, okay, go and fill the earth, like he did with Noah's sons, go and fill the earth. And he gave them all different territories, and he gave them different languages. But as they spread out, there was a leader who decided, we don't want to spread out like God said. Actually, we want to keep everyone together. Mm-hmm. You see, although we don't read it here, why did Nimrod get this reputation of being a mighty warrior? He was obviously taking people hostage, taking people captive. Mm. And, you know, we hear about this massive building project, building a city, building a temple. Who was going to do that? Well, probably, if it was Nimrod, it's not going to be Nimrod himself, is it?
No.
It's going to be the guys that he's gone and captured. And, you know, so what we're reading about Babylon is actually about the oppression of different nations. Yeah, slaves being made, not just to build a city, but to speak the same language and to say, you are part of this big kingdom. We're going to keep together and make a great name for ourselves. That was Nimrod's heart. I've captured these people, I've brought them together, and I'm going to make us a great city and a great nation, and we're going to have a great name for ourselves. In fact, we're even going to be like God, which is why he builds this mighty tower. Who knows the size of this thing? But we do know that in those days they were building these things called ziggurats, which were like temples, and they went high, high, high in the air, because they felt that the higher you built, the closer you were to God. Mm. And for Nimrod, it sounds like he's saying, you know, we're going to build ourselves a temple so we can become like God. You heard that before?
Yeah.
So again, this is the working out of the fall, about humanity deciding we want to be like God. We want to have a name for ourselves, to be making our own choices. We don't want to scatter like God told them to. We don't want to fill the earth. We want to stay together, and we want to build something that will represent how great we are. And he does it through oppression, through violence and oppression. So not only do we see how sin works itself out in an individual, here we start to see how sin works itself out in a system. Empires, oppression. So, and we'll see that, you know, again and again through the scriptures. This is the first example of it. But they wanted to do things their way rather than God's way, and that meant holding everybody together, probably through oppression, that we're going to speak the same language, we're going to have the same culture, we're not going to be diverse, we're going to have everything the same. So this whole thing of having a one city, one temple, one language, that's the kingdom of man. That's what we you know, you look at empires through the years, that's what they do. They say, you'll speak our language, there'll be one main city that is the key city, and everyone has to go there. Be one temple, one religion, our religion. And we see that through the scriptures. We see it through history. That's what's happened through various empires, the British Empire, the American Empire, all the different empires. You'll see the same kind of things. But ultimately, the root of it is this oppression of people and wanting to build something for our own glory. So, what does God do? See, we often read this as saying, well, God comes and judges them. There is a judgment here, but it's actually a judgment against the wickedness that sets people free.
Okay.
So, you know, they do have, their languages are mixed, and suddenly they can't communicate with each other, and it causes a scattering. And effectively, God is coming to bring freedom for those that have been in oppression. Freedom to be who they really were. Freedom to go and speak their own languages. and to go and travel to where God had ordained their territories to be. It was the filling of the earth that God had commissioned in the first place.
That's interesting, because I was taught it in a negative way, that
Yeah.
he wanted to cut them down and humble them
Yeah,
because they were becoming too ahead of themselves.
yeah,
But what you're saying is he wanted them to be free to be themselves.
yeah. Well, you see, because I often read it like that, and I think most people probably do first reading, but then you start to think, well, okay, so really are different languages and cultures probably a bad thing? That really God, we should have had all one language and been all one culture, and that would have been a good thing. But actually that's not how the Bible then goes on to talk about different cultures and languages.
Yeah.
And we find that it's a blessing that all the different languages and cultures and people groups of the earth are actually, part of the rich diversity that God has created, and so it's a good thing. It's not a bad thing, and that's why I'm reading it like that.
No, I like it.
So, yeah. So God mixes the languages and releases the people to speak their own languages, to enjoy their own cultures, and to gain their own territories without the oppression of the Nimrods, the oppressive rulers, the violence, the men of violence that try and hold people together.
Okay.
So this is the story of the Tower of Babel. It's an important one because, you'll see it played out again, as I say, in different empires that come and go. Most importantly, we see it on the day of Pentecost.
Sorry, but just going back a minute.
Okay, so
You can see why we were taught that way, because, he says, if they've begun speaking the same language and they've done this, then nothing they plan to do will be impossible. Let's go down and confuse them.
yeah.
Doesn't sound positive, does it?
Okay, yeah. That word confuse is actually the word mix. It's
Oh.
kind of it's got negative connotations the way that we translate it.
Okay.
It's actually mix.
Okay. And what about the first bit where he says, "Oh no, they're going to be unstoppable now"?
Yeah, well, that is what happens if you get this, kind of oppression and gather people together. The empires of the world have done horrendous things. So people are powerful when they're together. There is a sense in which mankind, when it's all in one language, one culture, can do huge things, and usually quite oppressive things. So I think that's what it's saying. Look at what's going to happen here when they get to be such a big group of people going about things their own way.
So he's trying to protect them from that happening.
Yeah. To fulfil the mandate that was always there for them to fill the earth.
Okay. What were you talking about next?
So
Nineveh?
No, I was going to talk.
I can't remember what you said.
I was going to say, think about how the day of Pentecost.
Pentecost.
Went.
It's nothing like Nineveh.
No, nothing. Nimrod did build Nineveh, by the way.
Oh, really? Maybe that's what my brain did a little flip.
Yeah, maybe. But so we've got the day of Pentecost, and you think about it. Day of Pentecost, there was all these different nations had gathered to the one city. They had the one holy language that they all had to speak. They had the one temple that they all had to worship in. And what did God do on the day of Pentecost?
Tongues of fire.
Yeah.
Different languages.
Different languages. That's what we're talking about, hey? There's
Lots
languages.
of people getting saved.
So the key thing here is that instead of having one language, one city, one temple, this new beginning went into many languages. They all heard the wonders of God in their own language. So it wasn't just in Hebrew now they're speaking. They are suddenly released to hear about God in their own dialect, their own language, their own culture. They no longer that they have to come to the temple in order to worship God. That in a miraculous way the Holy Spirit has come and has made each person a living temple. Now the temple isn't one place, it's all over the place. lots of temples everywhere. And thirdly, no longer is Jerusalem the main city. It's not like you've got to go to Jerusalem on your pilgrimage to find God. Now God's city is the people all over the place. So it's like God doing the same thing here, releasing the oppressed people and setting them free to go and fill the whole earth. That's the way that God does it. I mean, you can see it all the way through, even into the new creation, if you like, that John writes about in the book of Revelation, where he sees this great crowd that cannot be numbered, and it says, and it's from every tribe and tongue and nation. He sees them before the throne of God. Do you imagine that? This guy's never travelled hardly at all. He's never seen Chinese people. He's probably never seen the people really dark-skinned. He'll be looking at this people group before the throne of God and saying, I've never even seen all these different cultures, all these different languages, and yet they're all there showing the wonders and the beauty of God. We don't just, people say, oh, it'd be great when we get into heaven and we can, all speak the same language. I don't think we will. We're going to have to learn languages because because those languages are important. They're part of people's God-given culture, and they're still there before the throne of God. So us English got some learning to do.
Absolutely.
So hopefully we'll have some time to do it and get down to learning it well. So anyway, so there's our story coming right the way through from Adam and Eve and their rebellion right the way through to the big systems and the empires of the world, and how rebellion against God affects every area. And we're at a stage where we're looking at the world thinking, sure, this is a bad story. It just gets worse and worse. Thankfully, God steps in, and we'll read about that next week. Okay, so our assignment today, which I'd love you to just spend an hour or two just thinking through all that we've talked about with the fall. And the assignment is simply this. This is an essay question. What are the implications of the fall today? So everything that we've spoken about.
That we get cold.
Try and look up. I really don't know if that's true.
I wonder how many people will write it in their essay.
Maybe. Let's see, shall we? What are the implications of the fall on our lives today? Okay? And then we'll look forward to talking that through soon.
Good luck with your essay.
Okay, thanks a lot, guys. See you next week.
Bye.
Bye.